And we begin tonight with the dangerous Arctic blast gripping a huge portion of the country and now causing a state of emergency.
Tonight, with much of the country in a deep freeze, the Great Lakes are battling a record-breaking bitter onslaught of snow. Oswego County, New York, now under a state of emergency. Redfield getting a record-shattering 62 inches of snow.
This is a little too early compared to what we normally get. You can't do nothing about it. Move it.
In Lorain, New York, firefighters tunneling their way into this home to rescue a woman trapped inside. Residents struggling to dig out and crews struggling to keep the roads passable.
It's coming at times faster than we can keep up with it.
In Erie, 65 inches of snow and still coming down. Nasir Al-Dumani spent most of the day digging out his family's 2 cars, trying to keep up with Mother Nature this week. He says, a losing battle.
We're drowning in snow. This is the best way I can put it.
Crews coming from as far away as Pittsburgh. The National Guard called in too.
One problem that officials here in Erie are dealing with, mounds of snow that turned out to be cars buried in. Owners just unable to get to them.
Icy roads causing more than 40 accidents in Kansas City alone. In Michigan City, Indiana, this plane skidding off a runway. Luckily, no one was hurt. And then there's the bone-chilling cold. Residents wearing winter gear indoors after 40,000 people in Cleveland lost power overnight.
This is the stuff that makes you stronger. I just keep on telling myself that.
Warming shelters open from Chicago to Boston and in Minneapolis, where the thermometer read -4, but it felt like 21 below in some spots. That brutal cold turning Minnehaha Falls into a frosty ice-scape.
Thousands of homes in the southwest were left without power after heavy snow hit the UK again. A yellow weather alert's been issued for ice and snow in parts of the country. Travellers were left stranded as roads became unusable in Gloucestershire, and over 100 flood alerts and warnings are in place across England. Authorities have warned that snow could also impact flights across the country.
Not one, but 2 earthquakes shook California Tuesday night just hours apart. According to the United States Geological Survey, the first quake was measured at 3.1 magnitude and struck in Santa Clara County around 7 p.m. Pacific.
About 3 hours later, a 3.9 magnitude quake shook the same area again. That quake was reportedly felt throughout the Bay Area, all the way up in Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley. No injuries or damage were immediately reported.
At least 10 people have been injured by an explosion at a supermarket in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, though their injuries were not life-threatening. Authorities say Wednesday's blast was caused by an improvised device containing the equivalent of 200 grams of TNT. The 10 people taken to hospital were not seriously injured. It's not yet clear if the suspected attack was terror-related. A probe has been launched on the grounds of attempted murder, but investigators are exploring all lines of inquiry. The incident comes weeks after Russian President Vladimir Putin called his US counterpart Donald Trump to thank him for a CIA tip that helped stop a series of planned terror attacks in the city.
Now to the unprecedented security for the annual New Year's Eve ball drop.
Countdown is on for New Year's Eve celebrations, and security officials are on high alert in New York.
3, 2, 1!
Expect the most security ever, with new garage closures, streets blocked off, concrete barricades, armed and plainclothes officers amongst the crowds, plus several additional checkpoints before entering Times Square. Banned from this year's ball drop, backpacks, large bags, and umbrellas. The strict rules and heightened law enforcement presence come after 2 terrorist attacks in New York City just in the past 2 months.
People should expect to see an increase in security this New Year's because of the ongoing threat we've seen from ISIS.
Recent joint assessment released by the FBI, NYPD, Department of Homeland Security, and the New York Port Authority said they remain concerned about international terrorists and domestic extremists potentially targeting the celebration in Times Square, where more than 1 million people are expected to gather to ring in 2018. But also along the Las Vegas Strip, law enforcement increasing security following the shooting in October that killed 58 and injured hundreds.
They're going to be concerned about any place where there's crowds gathering, where there's a certain vulnerability to those types of targets.
The German security services have identified a female terror network aggressively spreading Islamist ideology online. RT's Maria Finoshna reports on ISIL recruitment in Europe.
That's not for the first time what we see women actively involved in promoting jihadist views. We have been hearing reports about ISIS female recruiters since at least 2014. Those are wives of killed Islamic State fighters who decided after the death of their husbands to somehow continue that fight. But now Germany says that their number is on a constant dramatic rise.
The women are now ideology promoters. The men have realized that women can network much better and are therefore more capable of expanding the scene.
In this most recent case, Germany identified what they called the Islamist terrorist women's network, consisting of at least 40 what they call sisters who follow an ultra-conservative branch of Islam known as Salafism and spread extremist views via internet, particularly targeting so-called non-believers. All over Europe, including here in Germany, especially following last year's Berlin terror attack, Christmas has sadly become the time for extra concerns and worries over security, because Christians and their faith and their holidays and everything that is connected to it, including Christmas markets that are now operating and will be open for the next week at least all over Europe, have repeatedly been targeted by Islamists.
According to a U.S.-led international coalition, fewer than 1,000 Islamic State fighters remain in Iraq and Syria. The new number is a third of the estimated figure only 3 weeks ago. Iraq and Syria have both declared victory over the Islamic State in recent weeks. Their announcements follow a year that saw the two countries' armies, a range of foreign allies, and various local forces drive the fighters out of all the towns and villages that once made up their self-proclaimed caliphate.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has called Syrian President Bashar al-Assad a terrorist, saying it is impossible for Syrian peace efforts to continue with him in power. Turkey has long demanded the removal of Assad from power. However, it toned down its demands since it started working with Assad's allies, Russia and Iran, in the search for a political solution in Syria. Turkey is more concerned about Syrian Kurdish militias, insisting they cannot be invited to peace talks in the Kazakh capital, Astana.
Leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, says that the U.S. is the country's principal enemy, but the Iranian nation is prepared to defeat this enemy in all arenas.
بدانند ما در این مرحله و در مراحل دیگر دشمنان خودمون را، آمریکای جنایتکار را و همدستان آمریکا را به فضل الهی زمینگیر خواهیم کرد. به اذن الله تعالی در همه عرصه ها آمریکا را ما مأیوس خواهیم کرد.
Israel's transportation minister pushed ahead with a plan Wednesday to dig a railway tunnel under Jerusalem's Old City. It would pass near sites holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims and end at the Western Wall with a station named after President Donald Trump. Previous excavations by Israel near the holy site, which is the spiritual epicenter of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, have sparked violent Palestinian protests.
French children's magazine Youpi is now pulling its January issue from the stands in France and in Belgium after catching a text saying Israel isn't a, quote, real country. The full excerpt reads, quote, there are 197 countries like France, Algeria, or Germany. There are a few more, but not all countries in the world agree that they are real countries. For example, the State of Israel or North Korea, end quote. The problem in the magazine, aimed at kids aged 5 to 8, was raised by many groups via social media, including French Jewish organization CRIF and Israeli ambassador to France Eliza Ben-Nun, who wrote that she was, quote, shocked by this lie taught to children, and that, quote, such rhetoric can only encourage anti-Zionism inseparable from anti-Semitism, end quote. The magazine's editor, Bertrand Fichou, says that they were not trying to challenge Israel's legitimacy, and that UP pulled the issue as soon as the mistake was brought to their attention. Regardless, Fichou says he apologizes for the incident and that he will blame himself for it all his life.
Israel is calling on Ukrainian authorities to take action against anti-Semitism after 3 Jewish sites were vandalized in Odessa. The Foreign Ministry says it expects the Ukrainian government to make a most determined effort to bring the perpetrators to justice. Graffiti on the gate of the Holocaust Museum included the words "Toasting the Holocaust," and the city's Brodsky Synagogue had the words "Jews out, Ukraine for Ukrainians." Ukraine's government is headed by Volodymyr Groysman, who is Jewish.
More than a dozen Ukrainian soldiers held by pro-Russian separatists have been released as part of a prisoner exchange. In all, some 74 government troops will be swapped for more than 300 rebel fighters at a neutral exchange point in the Donetsk region. Not all prisoners held by Ukraine have chosen to return to separatist-controlled areas. There are still 60 people in Kiev who are not included on the first list, and we've moved them to the second stage of the exchange. We haven't forgotten about them, and I'm sure we'll come back to the discussion of the second stage after the new year. Prisoner release and exchange was one of the points in the 2015 Minsk II peace accord, but this is the first swap in 15 months. The conflict in eastern Ukraine started in April 2014 after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula.
2017 began as a turbulent year for Venezuela, and it only got worse. Hyperinflation and years of failed economic policies led to a humanitarian crisis. Opposition protesters demanded an immediate presidential election in the hope of ousting President Nicolás Maduro. And it culminated in a bitter and deadly protest on April 19th, when government forces, armed with tear gas and water cannons, faced off with 3 million protesters in Caracas. Elsewhere in Latin America, politics has been just as tumultuous. In Brazil, former President Lula da Silva is appealing against his decade-long prison sentence for corruption on the grounds that his trial was politically motivated. Current President Michel Temer avoided a corruption trial after he secured enough votes in Brazil's Congress to ensure his presidential immunity, but now faces new charges of racketeering and obstruction of justice. He's denied those allegations. In Colombia, the FARC rebel forces emerged from their jungle encampments to surrender their weapons to the United Nations. The guerrilla army now has the right to form a political party, but after 5 decades of conflict and 250,000 deaths, the rebels' integration back into Colombian society may prove the country's greatest challenge yet. For Mexico, 2017 was the most violent year on record. Here, the number of killings, kidnappings and disappearances linked to spiraling drug cartel violence were unprecedented. But it was the earthquake in September that caught the world's attention. 2 separate tremors brought hundreds of buildings to rubble and killed more than 500 people. Thousands more were left without homes. In the recovery effort, civilians proved more effective than the government, and many regions will take many more years to recover. It has been a year of political conflict, natural disasters, and some of the worst crime in history for Latin America. But the focus now turns to what is to come. 6 Latin American countries are headed for elections in 2018, and a possible political transformation which could further send the region into uncharted territory.
Time now for some campus craziness spiraling out of control this year, with violent protests erupting over speeches from conservative speakers. Now college administrators bracing for a violent 2018, and they're blaming Trump supporters. Here now to weigh in, media director for campusreform.org and former digital director for Senator Marco Rubio's presidential campaign, Cabot Phillips. Mr. Phillips, good to see you as always. So what's going on?
The left has a special talent for blaming everything on President Trump. We know this. We see it every day. And now they're finding ways to blame the rise of these violent anti-fascist protesters, rioters on President Trump. Let's be honest here. The victims here are President Trump and his supporters, and the victim is free speech, ultimately. And too many administrators, college professors on campus, they're afraid to shut down these rioters, these protesters, because they don't want to be called intolerant by their fellow leftists. And so now, essentially, they're allowing free speech to be held hostage, where this coming year, they're admitting we feel conflicted between free speech but the safety of our students. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have free speech and also defend the safety of your campus.
It seems to me like Antifa and a lot of other groups are sort of immune from punishment, sanction, immune from almost anything. Why is that?
It's because the violence, when it's committed against the right, is viewed as not only acceptable but also justifiable. One of their tactics is labeling everyone they disagree with as a Nazi. And they say, well, violence is acceptable against Nazis, so if they get everyone to agree, those people who support Trump, they're Nazis.
Britain's Prince Harry has spoken about his rare interview conducted with former US President Barack Obama. During the discussion, the pair spoke about their shared interest in promoting causes, and Mr. Obama warned about the dangers of social media without mentioning Donald Trump by name.
All of us in leadership have to find ways in which we can recreate a common space on the internet. One of the dangers of the internet is that people can have entirely different realities. They can be just cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases. The truth is that on the internet, everything is simplified. And when you meet people face to face, it turns out they're complicated.
After the interview, Harry was asked whether he'd invite the Obamas to his wedding next year to US actress Meghan Markle, despite fears it could upset the current US president.
Well enough to invite him to your wedding?
Well, I don't know about that. That's we haven't put the invite or the guest list together yet. So who knows whether he's going to be invited or not. I wouldn't want to ruin that surprise.
China is discussing revisions to its constitution, something that could give current President Xi Jinping more time and power. Xinhua reports the proposal to amend part of the constitution was decided on Wednesday. The details on possible amendments aren't clear, but the Communist Party's Central Committee will reportedly discuss the proposal next month. If it goes through, it would be the first change to the constitution since 2004. This news adds to the speculation that President Xi will try to stay in office beyond the constitution's current limit of 2 5-year terms. Others speculate the amendment would codify a National Supervision Commission, which would integrate anti-corruption efforts into one body. Both moves would benefit Xi, who already enshrined his name and ideology into the Communist Party's constitution back in October. With that legacy and the fact that Xi hasn't even named a successor, the Chinese president may be starting off 2018 by further tightening his hold on the country.
Russian President Vladimir Putin officially launched his bid for a fourth term as Russia's president on Wednesday. The announcement comes as his main opponent called for a day of protests against the elections. The former KGB leader has dominated Russian politics for 2 decades. He is likely to score a comfortable win because his only serious opponent, Alexei Navalny, was barred from standing against him due to a fraud conviction. Navalny says his prosecution was politically motivated.
Russia is struggling to cope with the growing HIV epidemic. And making matters worse is the emergence of people in the country who deny the disease even exists. Ilya Petrenko investigates.
HIV epidemic is sweeping across Russia. According to health experts, more than 1 million Russians are infected.
Almost 1 in 100 people in Russia are diagnosed HIV positive. Despite a year of increased efforts to tackle the spread of the virus, the country is on course to see annual infections pass 100,000 again, which accounts for almost 2/3 of all infections in Europe and Central Asia.
World AIDS Day saw quite a few depressing headlines in Russian, like Russia's losing the war on HIV. In most countries around the world, the number of new cases of HIV is going down. The sad truth is, here it's going up.
For quite a long time, 5 years, not nearly enough attention has been paid to the issue of HIV/AIDS. There has not been enough funding.
The war on HIV requires decisive action. Without it, this academic told me, the virus spreads far beyond the two main so-called risk groups, drug users and men who have sex with men.
We've lost time, that's for sure.
While health authorities were losing time, people known as AIDS denialists wasted none online, spreading fake HIV news.
On Russian social networks, in blogs and elsewhere online, AIDS denialists are clearly ahead of us, and that's really dangerous. If you refuse therapy, an early death is guaranteed.
Silicon Valley is confronting a brand new scandal. Workers at Amazon, Microsoft, and other major technology companies are facing allegations of paying for sex on company grounds.
Tech giants are facing allegations of sex trafficking amongst their employees, and now Silicon Valley is facing further scrutiny concerning women in the workplace. According to a report from Newsweek, in which a publication obtained emails revealing, quote, a horny nest of hobbyists at tech giants Microsoft, Amazon, and other firms in Seattle's high-tech alley. Law enforcement officials with the King County Prosecutor's Office in Seattle have been collecting information from brothel companies, and Newsweek obtained the emails via public records request that included high-level Amazon and Microsoft directors. The Department of Justice has found that Seattle has the fastest growing sex industry in the United States. And one sting operation arrested 17 men and 1 woman, but only a director at Amazon and another at Microsoft opted for trial. And as goes with the tech world, those who have engaged in sex trafficking are being labeled as hobbyists and went as far as to set up an online review board of the sex workers. Studies conducted by Polaris, an anti-human trafficking organization, found that more than 700 Asian brothels are based in Silicon Valley, which is 20% of brothels believed to be operating in California. And another study finds that 63% of prostitution occurs on company properties. The tech sector is now being accused of enabling a culture that has readily embraced trafficking. And we did reach out to Amazon and Microsoft for comment, but both refused comment until after the holidays.